My sister's wedding planner notified me, "Your family banned you, but held on to your $50,000 deposit." It was a Thursday morning in July, and I was in my office on the 40th floor of the Four Seasons Hotel in Miami, Florida. The space was all glass and light, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing off Biscayne Bay's turquoise sparkle. My desk, a sleek mahogany piece I'd picked up at a Coconut Grove antique shop, was cluttered with financial reports for Larson Luxury Group, the hospitality company I'd built over the last 10 years. At 30, I was the CEO, but to my family, I was still Emma, the reckless one who dropped out of NYU to chase a dream they didn't understand. I was sipping coffee from my favorite mug, a chipped ceramic thing with Miami Beach scrawled in faded pink letters, a gift from my first employee, when my assistant, Carla, buzzed through the intercom. "Ms. Larson, you've got a call from Serene Celebrations Wedding Planning." I hesitated, my pen hovering over a spreadsheet. Then it clicked. My younger sister, Chloe, was getting married in 6 weeks at the Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables, a grand old place with coral stone arches and palm-lined courtyards. I'd quietly paid a $50,000 deposit to cover their wedding costs after Chloe's fiancé, Ethan, let slip they were struggling to afford the kind of event Chloe dreamed of, with a big guest list and a waterfront reception. The Biltmore's minimum for food and beverage alone was around $45,000 for 150 guests, and with ceremony fees and extras, $50,000 was a realistic chunk of the total $80,000 budget. I never told my family it was my money. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. To them, I was the daughter who threw away a shot at a real career when I left NYU's Stern School of Business. They didn't know that the little event planning business I'd mentioned at holiday dinners had grown into Larson Luxury Group, a hospitality empire worth $4.2 billion. It started in a cramped studio apartment in Coconut Grove, where I'd plan corporate galas while eating instant ramen. During the economic downturn a few years back, I'd snapped up struggling venues and hotels across Florida, like the Biltmore and parts of the Fontainebleau, turning them into gold mines as Miami's tourism boomed. Last year, my company pulled in $1.5 billion in revenue from 52 venues, 15 restaurants, 10 hotels, and a handful of other services across Florida and Georgia. But to my parents and Chloe, I was still the kid who didn't finish college, always one step away from failure. I felt a mix of pride and quiet hurt as I looked out at the skyline, half of which I owned through various real estate holdings. Pride because I'd built this from nothing. Hurt because no one in my family had ever asked how. I took a breath and picked up the phone. "Emma Larson speaking," I said, my voice steady despite the stack of work waiting. "Ms. Larson, this is Rachel from Serene Celebrations," the woman on the line said, her tone tight, like she was dreading the call. "I'm calling about the Chloe Larson and Ethan Brooks wedding at the Biltmore next month. I have some difficult news." I set my pen down, a knot forming in my stomach. "Go ahead." "Your family contacted us yesterday. They've asked to remove you from the guest list entirely. They mentioned a family disagreement and said you shouldn't attend the ceremony or reception." The words hit me hard, like a wave crashing over South Beach at high tide. I gripped the edge of my desk, my fingers brushing the worn edge of my coffee mug. My family, Mom, Dad, Chloe, had decided I wasn't welcome at my own sister's wedding. I felt betrayed, but also strangely unsurprised. They'd always seen me as the odd one out, the one who didn't fit their picture of success. Still, it hurt more than I expected, a sharp ache mixed with a flicker of anger. "I see," I said, keeping my voice even, though my heart was racing. Rachel hurried on, her words tumbling out. "They also asked if they could keep the $50,000 deposit you paid. They said it's already been spent on venue fees and other expenses, like the catering deposit and floral arrangements." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared out the window, the Miami skyline stretching across the horizon, shimmering towers I'd helped finance through my real estate arm. The $50,000 was mine, a gift to Chloe because I remembered her as a kid, sketching dream weddings in her notebook, talking about fairy lights and ocean views. I'd paid it without a second thought, wiring the money to Serene Celebrations to lock in the Biltmore's Mediterranean courtyard and a menu with filet mignon and key lime tartlets. It was a drop in the bucket for me, but for them to keep it while cutting me out? That was a different kind of sting. I felt a mix of emotions, fury at their audacity, sadness that they'd dismiss me so easily, and a small, stubborn pride that I'd been generous even when they didn't deserve it. My family had no idea that their disappointing daughter owned the very companies they were relying on for Chloe's big day. I took a slow breath, my mind already turning over what to do next. I sat there for a second after Rachel's words, the phone still in my hand, feeling that mix of hurt and resolve bubbling up. Part of me wanted to just let it go, to avoid the drama that always seemed to follow family stuff. But another part, the part that had built this business from late nights in humid Miami apartments, knew I couldn't. "Rachel," I said, my voice calm, even though my mind was racing, "I'd like you to cancel the entire wedding." There was a pause on her end, then her voice rose a little. "I'm sorry, what?" "Cancel the Chloe Larson and Ethan Brooks wedding, the venue at the Biltmore, the catering, the flowers, the photography, everything." "Ms. Larson, I don't understand," she said, sounding flustered now, like she was flipping through papers in her office. Maybe one of those cluttered desks in a Wynwood loft where a lot of event planners set up shop. "You're not the bride or the groom. You can't just cancel it." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly under me. My office was quiet except for the distant hum of the air conditioning, keeping out the sticky Florida heat. "What's the name of your company, Rachel?" "Serene Celebrations Wedding Planning." "And who owns Serene Celebrations?" A rustle of papers. "Larson Event Holdings." "And who owns Larson Event Holdings?" A longer pause this time. "Larson Luxury Group." "That's right. And I'm Emma Larson, CEO and sole owner of Larson Luxury Group. So yes, I can cancel this wedding. In fact, let's be specific. Cancel their reservation at the Biltmore Hotel, too. That's one of mine. The catering from our Fontainebleau division, the flower arrangements from our in-house florist at the Eden Rock, the photography package from our studio partners, all of it." Rachel's breathing quickened. "Ms. Larson, I had no idea, but the wedding is in 6 weeks. There are 150 guests, deposits paid for hotel blocks." "Cancel everything," I said. "Refund any deposits paid by guests for accommodations. That's standard policy to keep things fair. But send the Larson and Brooks families a bill for the full amount they owe, minus my $50,000 deposit, which I'm keeping as a cancellation fee." The $50,000 wasn't just a random number. It covered the non-refundable portions like the Biltmore's venue hold and initial vendor setups, which in Miami's competitive wedding scene often lock in 6 months out. Cancellation fees are typical here, 50 to 100% if you pull out close to the date, especially for high-end spots where weekends book up a year in advance. As the owner, I had the right to enforce that through our contracts. It wasn't about breaking rules, just applying them. "Ms. Larson, this will destroy the wedding," Rachel said, her voice almost pleading. "There's no way they can find alternatives this close. Every decent venue in Miami is booked solid for summer. Think about the Biltmore, the Ritz-Carlton in Key Biscayne, even the smaller spots in Coral Gables." "That's not my problem anymore," I replied, and hung up. I felt a pang of guilt right after, wondering if I was being too harsh on Chloe, who might not even know the full story. But then I thought about how they'd cut me out while holding on to my money, and the guilt faded into something firmer. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, staring at the bay where yachts bobbed lazily in the marina below. It took me back to how it all started 10 years ago when I was 20 and walking away from NYU. I wasn't failing classes. In fact, I was doing well in business school, but during a summer internship at a small event firm in the meatpacking district, I saw how underserved the luxury event market was down in Miami. The city was exploding with international visitors, Art Basel crowds, and celebrity weddings, but the services felt outdated. So I left school, moved back to Florida, and started Larson Events in a tiny studio apartment in Coconut Grove, with its shady banyan trees and artsy vibe that made long workdays feel a little less lonely. I'd work 18-hour days planning corporate mixers at beachfront spots or intimate weddings on Key Biscayne, sleeping on a futon surrounded by mood boards and vendor contracts. My family's reaction? They thought it was a phase. "Emma's going through something," my mom would say at our Sunday dinners in our old house in Pinecrest, a suburb with manicured lawns and mango trees in every yard. "She'll come back to a real job soon." Dad, who'd worked his whole life as an accountant in downtown Miami, nodded along, worried I'd end up broke. Chloe, 5 years younger, was the golden child, acing high school and later landing a steady marketing gig at a firm near Brickell, the financial district with its high-rises and after-work happy hours. Within 2 years, I'd saved enough to buy my first property, a small event hall in South Beach that was struggling after a bad hurricane season. I got it for $500,000, undervalued because of flood damage repairs, and turned it around by focusing on eco-friendly upgrades that appealed to Miami's growing green crowd. My family still saw me as playing entrepreneur. By year 4, I owned 6 venues across 3 counties. That's when Larson Luxury Group really took shape, and I started acquiring complementary businesses, catering outfits that specialized in fresh seafood from local Biscayne Bay suppliers, florists who sourced tropical blooms from homestead farms, even transportation services with hybrid limos to fit the city's push toward sustainability. The big growth came in years 7 and 8 during the economic dip after the pandemic. I scooped up distressed properties like the Biltmore in Coral Gables. Its historic charm was fading, but with renovations highlighting the Mediterranean architecture and adding modern amenities like rooftop pools, it became a hotspot again. The Fontainebleau's catering arm came next, famous for its oceanfront setups during Miami Beach events. My family remained clueless. At Thanksgiving and our parents' screened-in lanai overlooking a canal where manatees sometimes swam by, they'd ask about my little business while praising Chloe's latest promotion. When I casually mentioned buying a hotel chain, they nodded politely and pivoted to her stories about client pitches over craft cocktails. Even now, at 30, they saw the Harvard equivalent dropout, well, NYU in my case, as the family disappointment. They didn't know I'd built something that employed hundreds, boosted local economies with events that drew tourists from Latin America and Europe, and generated $1.5 billion last year through smart expansions during low times. Part of me was angry they never asked, but another part felt relieved. I'd proven it to myself first. About an hour after my call with Rachel, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was my dad, and I could hear the tension in his voice right away, like he was calling from his home office in Pinecrest, surrounded by his neatly filed tax documents and the faint scent of Cuban coffee brewing in the kitchen. "Emma, I just got a call from the Biltmore saying Chloe's wedding venue is canceled. There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Dad," I said, trying to keep my tone level, though a part of me felt a twist of satisfaction mixed with regret. I didn't want to hurt Chloe, but I couldn't ignore how they'd treated me. "What do you mean? This is ridiculous. We have a contract." "A contract with Serene Celebrations, which is owned by Larson Event Holdings, which is part of Larson Luxury Group, my company." The line went quiet for a few seconds, and I pictured him frowning, maybe adjusting his glasses as he did when puzzled. My dad wasn't a bad person. He'd worked hard his whole life, saving every penny for our family vacations to the Keys, teaching us about budgets over domino games on the weekends. But he'd always valued stability, the kind Chloe had with her 9-to-5 job, and he saw my path as risky, something that might embarrass the family at neighborhood barbecues. "Emma, what are you talking about?" I'm talking about the fact that you all decided to ban me from my sister's wedding while keeping the $50,000 I paid for it. So I canceled everything: the venue, the catering, the hotel blocks at the Fontainebleau, the flowers, the photography, the rehearsal dinner, the bachelor party, the transportation. All of it runs through companies I own. Another long silence. You paid for the wedding? Yes, Dad. Congratulations. You just uninvited the person financing your daughter's big day. I heard muffled voices in the background, probably my mom joining in, her voice shaky. She'd always been the peacemaker, baking pastelitos for family gatherings and clipping coupons for Publix runs. But she had her own quiet judgments, like sighing over my unsettled life during our weekly phone calls. "Emma," she said, taking the phone, "we had no idea you were this successful. You never told us." I tried, Mom. Every family dinner for 10 years, I tried to share what I was building. Remember when I mentioned buying the Biltmore 3 years ago? You said it was nice I was staying busy. When I talked about expanding into hotels, you asked when I'd get a real job. But you dropped out of NYU to do this. Dad cut in, clearing his throat. We thought you were struggling. I saw an opportunity and took it. While Chloe was in marketing meetings, I was closing deals that brought in millions. Check our corporate website or the business registry or Forbes' list of fastest growing private companies. We were number 12 last year with $1.5 billion in revenue. More muffled talk, and I felt a pang, part anger at their blindness, part sadness that it took this to make them listen. They weren't villains. They just clung to their idea of success, shaped by years of scraping by in a city where flash and fortune could vanish overnight. Rachel called back later that afternoon, her voice hurried like she was pacing in her office amid stacks of fabric swatches and vendor catalogs. "Ms. Larson, I've been getting calls all day. Your parents, Chloe, even Ethan's family. They're asking about rebooking. With 6 weeks' notice, it's impossible. Every quality venue in the region is booked. The Biltmore, the Ritz-Carlton in Key Biscayne, even the Vizcaya Museum Gardens." I considered this, swirling my coffee, now cold in its mug. Part of me wanted to stand firm, to let them feel the weight of their choices. But another part remembered Chloe's excitement over wedding magazines at our parents' house, flipping pages under the ceiling fan. What about the Lowe's Miami Beach? That's one of mine too, and it might have space. It's your smallest venue, Ms. Larson, with reception capacity for 100 guests maximum, and it's already partially booked that weekend. They can have it, I said. Basic catering package. Think standard menu with chicken or fish options, nothing extravagant. House flowers from our local supplier, a staff photographer only. Total cost, $250,000. Paid in advance. Rachel hesitated. That's 5 times what they were paying before, and half the space. The original budget was around $80,000 total, with your $50,000 covering the bulk. This new price includes penalties for the short notice and rescheduling fees, right? Exactly. In Miami's wedding market, last-minute changes rack up costs. Vendor overtime, rush orders for linens and decor. It's not unusual for luxury events to hit that if you're squeezing into a prime spot. The $250,000 was high, but justified by the drama. It covered the base venue fee of about $45,000, catering at $255 per person for 100 guests totaling around $25,500 bar setup and inflated fees to reflect the hassle. And if they refuse, they can get married at City Hall in downtown Miami. I hung up, feeling conflicted, empowered, but also a little weary of the whole mess. 3 hours later, Chloe called directly, her voice thick like she'd been crying. Chloe, with her neat ponytail and love for yoga classes in Midtown, wasn't mean-spirited. She'd just grown up in the shadow of our parents' expectations, assuming I was the flaky one because I didn't follow the same path. "Emma, what's going on? Mom's been upset all day. Dad's called every vendor and they all say you own their companies." "It's not a joke, Chloe. It's business. Your wedding that I was financing, that I was banned from." "We thought it would be better without the tension," she said quietly. "You and I haven't been close lately, and Mom worried about arguments. Better to exclude your sister while keeping her money? I paid that $50,000 6 months ago when Ethan mentioned you were short, to help with the Biltmore and all." "We didn't know it was you," Chloe admitted. "I'll make a deal. You can have the wedding at one of my venues, but I want 3 things. A formal apology from everyone, acknowledgement that you misjudged me, and my invitation restored because you actually want me there." Chloe sighed. "I need to talk to Ethan and our parents." "Of course." That evening, Ethan called too, polite but strained, explaining he'd gone along with the decision to avoid family stress, though he felt bad about it now. They all had their reasons, tangled in years of assumptions, but it didn't make it right. The family agreed to my terms the next day, and we scheduled a meeting for that Saturday at the private dining room in the Fontainebleau, one of my properties on Miami Beach. I arrived early, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, where the waves rolled in steadily under the afternoon sun. The room was elegant but understated, with polished wood tables, fresh orchids from a local grower in Homestead, and a faint, salty breeze slipping through the vents. It was a space I'd renovated myself a few years back, adding subtle nods to Miami's Art Deco history with geometric patterns in the rugs and chrome accents on the chairs. My family showed up together, Mom, Dad, Chloe, and Ethan, looking a bit out of place as they stepped in, their eyes widening at the view and the quiet luxury. Mom clutched her purse, the same practical leather one she'd carried to church in Pinecrest for years, her face lined with worry. Dad straightened his polo shirt, probably one from his golf outings with old friends. Chloe and Ethan held hands, Chloe in a simple sundress that reminded me of our beach days as kids, collecting shells on Crandon Park. "Emma," Dad said, extending his hand a little formally, like we were in a business meeting rather than a family talk. "Thank you for seeing us." "Have a seat," I said, gesturing to the table where servers, discreet staff from my team, brought in lunch, grilled mahi-mahi with mango salsa, a staple in Miami cuisine using fresh catch from Biscayne Bay, and sides of plantains and black beans. As we settled in, Mom looked around the room again. "This place is beautiful, Emma. The ocean view reminds me of those family trips to the Keys." "I own it," I said simply. "I mentioned expanding into resorts 3 years ago. You said it sounded adventurous." Dad cleared his throat, setting down his fork. "Emma, we owe you a major apology." "Go ahead." "We misjudged you badly," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of discomfort, like admitting fault didn't come easy after years of being the family provider. "For a long time, we saw what we wanted to see, a daughter who took risks we didn't understand. We worried you'd regret leaving school, that you'd struggle like we did early on." Mom nodded, her eyes misty, probably thinking back to their own tight budgets when we were growing up. Chloe leaned forward, twisting her engagement ring, a modest diamond Ethan had saved for during his teaching job at a local high school. "Emma, I'm sorry for dismissing what you were doing, for assuming you were just getting by, and for going along with uninviting you. I thought it would keep things smooth, but it was wrong." "Why assume I was irresponsible?" I asked, feeling that old mix of frustration and longing for understanding. "Because you left NYU," Dad said, "because you didn't have a traditional job like Chloe's. We didn't realize acquiring a hotel chain meant you owned them." Ethan spoke up quietly. "We'd like to start over, Emma. Learn about your life, your business." "And if I hadn't turned out successful?" I asked. Mom answered, tears in her eyes now. "We probably would have kept misjudging you. That's what hurts the most." At least they were honest, their motivations rooted in fear and habit rather than malice. "I'm proud of you," Mom added, "not just for this empire, but for helping with the wedding anyway." Chloe stood and came around the table. "Emma, would you be my maid of honor?" I looked at her, seeing the sister who'd once shared secrets under the covers during thunderstorms. For the first time in years, there was real vulnerability in her eyes. "I'd be honored," I said. The wedding happened 6 weeks later at the Lowe's Miami Beach, my smallest venue, but still lovely, with its oceanfront terrace where sea breezes carried the scent of salt and hibiscus. Despite the scaled-down size, 100 guests max, the day was beautiful, the gardens manicured with palm fronds swaying in the typical Miami humidity. My staff executed everything smoothly. A simple ceremony under a white canopy, basic catering with grilled shrimp skewers and key lime pie, reflecting the local flavors that make South Florida weddings feel authentic. During my maid of honor speech, I stood at the podium overlooking the crowd, many of whom were whispering about the last-minute changes. When Chloe and I were kids, we'd build sandcastles on Virginia Key, dreaming big. Somewhere along the way, we grew apart. I chose a different path, one that looked like failure to some. But success isn't about following expectations. It's about building something meaningful and sharing it with the people you love. I raised my glass to Chloe and Ethan. May you build a beautiful life together, always seeing each other clearly. Later, as the evening wound down on the terrace with string lights twinkling against the darkening sky, Dad approached me. "Emma, why didn't you tell us outright? Why let us think you were struggling?" "I tried," I said, leaning on the railing, the waves crashing below. "But I wanted you to be proud of me for who I am, not what I own. Dropping out of NYU was the right choice. Building from that Coconut Grove apartment had value." "We failed that test," he admitted, putting a hand on my shoulder, his usual reserve cracking a bit. "But you chose family over pride." As I drove home that night along Ocean Drive, past the neon-lit Art Deco hotels and late-night crowds spilling from sidewalk cafes, I thought about the 10 years I'd spent building my empire while my family saw only the surface. The NYU dropout who became a force in Miami's hospitality scene, the event planner who shaped parts of the city's skyline. Success wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about staying open enough to let them see me right. The next morning, my phone buzzed with texts from Chloe and my parents, suggesting a family dinner at their place, grilled snapper on the barbecue like old times. Sitting in my office again, looking out at Biscayne Bay, I realized something. True success is being strong enough to keep caring, even when others take time to catch up.